It began, as most of my life's biggest mistakes and subsequent miracles have, with a blanket. Not just any blanket, but the quilt. It lived folded at the foot of Clara's bed, a monolithic block of navy blue and forest green, heavy as a guilty conscience. I only knew of its existence because I'd once helped her move her mattress and had to heft the thing out of the way, my arms straining under its dense, cotton-packed weight. It seemed like a relic from another time, a piece of functional art far too serious for our cheap, drafty apartment with its perpetually rattling window panes. My own blanket was a flimsy fleece thing I'd bought on sale, the color of a faded sunset, offering all the thermal protection of a single paper towel. On that particular Tuesday in November, it was proving catastrophically insufficient. My breakup with Anna was 3 weeks old, a wound still raw and weeping, and the chill in the air felt less like weather and more like a manifestation of the gaping hollow in my chest. I was cocooned on the lumpy end of our sofa, shivering, pretending to watch some forgettable French film while actually just replaying every stupid, cutting thing Anna had said. The cold was a physical presence, seeping up from the floorboards, slithering down my collar. It was the kind of cold that makes you feel utterly, cosmically alone. Then the front door clicked open and shut, and Clara was home. She moved through the apartment with a quiet economy of motion that always made me feel like a tangled mess of limbs by comparison. I heard the soft thud of her work bag on the floor of her room, the rustle of her changing out of her stiff office clothes, the sigh she let out that sounded like the slow leak of a tire. I didn't turn around. I just pulled my useless blanket tighter, my teeth chattering softly. A few minutes later, she appeared in the living room doorway, a gray sweater soft over her shoulders. Her eyes, the color of moss after rain, took in my pathetic, shivering form. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me, a small frown line appearing between her brows. I braced myself for some practical, kind but distant suggestion, like putting on another layer or making tea. Instead, she said, "That's ridiculous. You're going to get sick." Before I could formulate a reply, some self-deprecating quip about my heart being too broken to regulate my body temperature, she turned and disappeared back into her room. I heard a faint grunt of effort, and then she was back, the quilt in her arms. It was even more formidable up close, a true leviathan of fabric. She held it out. "Scoot over," she said. It wasn't a question. My brain short-circuited. I stared at her, then at the quilt. Sharing a blanket. With Clara. My roommate, who organized her spice rack alphabetically and spoke about her dating life, the few times she mentioned it, in terms of vague, bland men named Mark or David. Clara, who was so thoroughly, intimidatingly straight that she made me feel like a walking stereotype in my flannel shirts and scuffed boots. It felt dangerous, like accepting a ride from a beautiful, mysterious stranger. But I was so cold. The words of refusal died in my throat, frozen before they could form. I just nodded dumbly and shifted my legs, tucking them closer to my body to make room. She dropped the quilt over both of us, the weight of it a sudden, shocking comfort. It settled around me, heavy and secure, smelling faintly of cedar and her laundry detergent. Then, she sat down beside me. Not too close, but not primly far away either. A careful, neutral distance. The heat from her body radiated across the small gap between us. I could feel it on my arm, a warm front meeting my icy skin. The film was still playing, subtitles flashing across the screen, but I couldn't read them. My entire consciousness had shrunk to the space of our shared sofa, to the solid presence of the woman beside me and the profound, grounding weight of her blanket. My shivering stopped. The cold didn't just recede, it was annihilated, replaced by a slow creeping warmth that felt perilously close to peace. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs a frantic, terrified rhythm. "Don't read into this," I told myself. "It's just warmth. It's just practicality. It means nothing." But it already felt like everything. That night established a new, unspoken rule in our apartment. When the temperature dropped and the ancient radiator clanked in protest, the quilt would emerge. It became a silent invitation. Clara would come home, find me huddled on the couch, and wordlessly retrieve it from her room. We never talked about it. It was just a thing that happened, a piece of our domestic landscape, like the leaky faucet or the stack of mail on the counter. We'd sit under its weight, a comfortable foot of space between us, and coexist. Sometimes we'd watch a movie, our commentary sparse. Sometimes she would read a thick novel, her brow furrowed in concentration, while I sketched in my notebook, the scratching of my pencil the only sound in the room. I learned the cartography of her presence in those quiet hours. I learned the way a small muscle in her jaw would tick when a passage in her book was particularly compelling. I learned the exact shade of her hair in the dim glow of the lamp, not just brown but a complex tapestry of amber and deep mahogany. I learned the scent of her skin, a clean, subtle mix of soap and something uniquely her, something I couldn't name, but found myself trying to subtly inhale whenever she shifted. The space between us began to feel less like a buffer and more like a live wire, humming with unspoken energy. My sketchbook filled with drawings of her hands. The way her long fingers curled around the edge of her book, the precise shape of her knuckles, the neat, unpainted ovals of her nails. I'd draw from memory later, in the privacy of my room, feeling a hot flush of shame and something else, something sharp and aching that I refused to name. I told myself it was artistic appreciation. I told myself I was just lonely, my heart a vacant home looking for any warm body to haunt. I was projecting, that was all. It was easier to believe that than to confront the terrifying alternative. One evening, we decided to make soup. The kitchen was a cramped galley, forcing a clumsy choreography. I was chopping carrots at the small counter space by the sink, and she was behind me, reaching for the stockpot in the cabinet above my head. As she stretched, her body pressed lightly against my back. It was momentary, accidental, but it sent a jolt through my entire system. I froze, the knife still in my hand. "Sorry," she murmured, her voice close to my ear. Her breath was warm. She didn't move away immediately. Her hand came to rest on my waist, a steadying, casual touch. But it wasn't casual. Nothing about it felt casual. Her fingers were a brand on the thin cotton of my t-shirt. I could feel the distinct pressure of each one. My own breath hitched. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, the scent of onions on my hands, and the sound of her breathing just behind me. It probably lasted 3 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. Then she pulled back, grabbing the pot and setting it on the stove with a soft clatter. When I risked a glance at her, her back was to me, but I saw the stiffness in her shoulders. The air was thick with all the things we weren't saying. I went back to chopping carrots, my hands trembling slightly. "It's nothing," I chanted in my head, a desperate mantra against the rising tide of hope. "It's just a roommate thing. It's nothing." But my body, traitor that it was, knew it was a lie. It was a language I had been starved of for so long, the simple, grounding grammar of touch, and I was beginning to realize I would do almost anything to hear it spoken again. The small kindnesses were the worst. They were the insidious little cracks that appeared in the fortress I was trying so hard to maintain around my heart. It started with coffee. I'd stumble out of my room, sleep-addled and surly, to find a mug already on the counter, steam ghosting from its surface, made exactly how I liked it, a splash of oat milk, no sugar. There was never a note, never a word about it. It was just there, a silent offering. Then she started buying the brand of herbal tea I liked, the expensive one I only bought as a treat, and leaving the box on the shelf next to my mug. She'd ask about my freelance design projects, not in a polite, perfunctory way, but with genuine questions, remembering the names of clients and the specifics of frustrating feedback. She listened, her moss-green eyes focused on me, making me feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and addictive. Each gesture was a small, steady pressure against my defenses. I was a dam, and Clara was the persistent, patient water, finding every hairline fracture, every tiny weakness, and pressing. The wall was going to break, and I was terrified of the flood. The illusion of her straightness, my one flimsy piece of driftwood in this emotional ocean, was what I clung to. And then, one Sunday afternoon, her mother called. Clara was in the living room, and I was in the kitchen, ostensibly washing dishes, but really just standing at the sink, listening. Her voice was different on the phone with her family, brighter, a little more strained. I could only hear her side of the conversation, a series of placating murmurs. Yes, Mom, I'm fine. Work is good. No, I haven't, a pause. Mom, I told you, I'm not interested in being set up with Richard's son, another, longer pause. Her voice dropped, losing its manufactured brightness. It's not about being busy. I don't want to. Please, let's not talk about this again. The finality in her tone was sharp. I heard the soft beep as she ended the call. A heavy silence descended on the apartment. I stood at the sink, my hands submerged in soapy water, my heart feeling like a cold, hard stone in my chest. Richard's son. It was so mundane, so normal, so painfully heterosexual. It was the confirmation I kept telling myself I didn't need but secretly dreaded. She was just a kind person, a good roommate. I was the one who was turning shared blankets and mugs of coffee into some grand, unrequited romance. I was a fool. That night, I made an excuse. I have to pull an all-nighter for a project, I lied, grabbing my laptop. Gonna be in my room. I saw the flicker of something in her eyes, disappointment, confusion, but she just nodded. Okay. Let me know if you need anything. I shut my bedroom door, and it felt like I was closing it on a part of myself. I sat in my cold room, wrapped in my own thin, useless blanket, and felt the familiar chill return, deeper this time. The distance I created became a chasm. I'd leave early, come home late. I wore my headphones around the apartment, a clear do not disturb sign. When we passed in the hallway, I'd offer a tight, brittle smile and keep walking. The quilt remained folded at the foot of her bed. The couch felt vast and empty. The entire apartment seemed to be holding its breath. The silence wasn't comfortable anymore. It was jagged, full of sharp edges and unspoken accusations. Clara retreated, too. The morning coffee stopped. She became as quiet and ghost-like as I was, a ship passing in the night. The warmth we had built, accidental or not, was gone, and the cold was unbearable. I missed her. It was a physical ache, a phantom limb I kept reaching for. I missed the weight of her blanket, the sound of her breathing in the quiet, the simple, solid fact of her presence. I had chosen safety over hope, and the result was an isolation so profound it felt like I was suffocating. The breaking point arrived on the back of a storm. The wind howled outside, rattling the window frames in their sockets, and a hard, slanted rain beat a frantic rhythm against the glass. It was the kind of night that felt like the world was ending, or at least trying to. The power had been flickering for an hour, each dip in the lights making my stomach clench. I was in my room, staring at my laptop screen, trying to force myself to work, but the words just swam in front of my eyes. The self-imposed exile was eating me alive. I felt stretched thin, a rubber band pulled to its absolute limit. I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart jumped. Yeah. My voice was rough. The door opened a crack, and Clara's head appeared in the gap. Her face was pale in the hallway light, her expression unreadable. The power might go out for real, she said, her voice low. I found some candles, just in case. I just nodded, unable to form a real response. She hesitated, her hand still on the doorknob. The silence stretched, filled only by the roar of the wind. Maya, she said, and my name on her lips was a physical touch. Can we stop this? This awful, suffocating silence. This polite, painful distance. My throat was tight. I felt a stinging behind my eyes. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend. I gave a shaky, defeated nod. Okay, I whispered. She opened the door wider. Come out to the living room, she said softly. Please, I followed her like a sleepwalker. The quilt was already spread over the sofa, a dark, welcoming island in the flickering light of the room. She hadn't brought it out for weeks. Seeing it there felt like a surrender. A truce. I sat down on one end, and she sat on the other, pulling the heavy fabric over both of our laps. For a long time, we just sat there, listening to the storm rage outside, the familiar weight a silent apology between us. Finally, I couldn't bear it. The truth was a physical pressure in my chest, needing to get out. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely audible over the rain. For being so weird, she turned her head to look at me. The lamp on the end table cast her face in shadows and gold. I missed this, she said, her gaze steady and direct. It wasn't an accusation. It was a confession. And it broke me. I can't do this, Clara, I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I can't sit here with you under this blanket and pretend. It's not. It's not just about being warm for me. And I know you're not. I heard you on the phone with your mom, and I get it. I'm just making everything complicated, and I'm sorry my voice cracked on the last word. I stared down at my hands, twisted in the fabric of the quilt, bracing myself for the awkward retreat, the gentle but firm rejection. I expected her to say, "Oh," or "I understand," and then the chasm would be back, wider and more permanent than ever. But the rejection never came. Instead, the silence was filled with a soft rustling as she shifted, turning her whole body to face me. I forced myself to look up. She wasn't looking at me with pity or confusion. She was looking at me with a startling, heartbreaking tenderness. Her expression was one of profound relief. "Richard's son," she said, a small, wry smile touching her lips. "God, no," she shook her head. "Maya, the reason I don't want my mom to set me up with men has absolutely nothing to do with me being busy." She took a breath, and I saw the vulnerability in her eyes, a mirror of my own. I haven't let myself think about it. It was easier to just go along with what everyone expected. It was easier than admitting that none of it ever felt right. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Nothing felt right. Until this. Until sitting here with you, she reached out, her movements slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. Her fingers, cool and gentle, came to rest against my cheek. My skin burned where she touched me. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed, her thumb stroking my jawline. "And I don't really have the right words. I just know that when you pulled away, it felt like the lights went out. The power in the apartment chose that exact moment to die." The lamp flickered and went dark, plunging us into a sudden, intimate blackness, broken only by the faint gray light from the window. In the dark, with the storm as our witness, she leaned in. Her lips met mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a question. It was hesitant and soft, a discovery. I answered her with a quiet sigh, my hands coming up to tangle in the soft fabric of her sweater. It tasted of tea and rain and a relief so profound it felt like I was breathing for the first time in years. The surprise wasn't that she kissed me. The surprise was that it felt like coming home. The storm passed sometime before dawn. I woke to a world washed clean and silent, the only sound the soft drip of water from the eaves. The power was still out. We were on the couch, tangled together under the heavy quilt, my head on her shoulder, her arm wrapped securely around my waist. In the pale, pre-dawn light, she was still asleep, her face relaxed and peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. Her eyelashes were dark crescents against her skin. I watched her breathe, the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest, and felt a quiet, bone-deep sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't a mistake. This was a miracle. When she woke, it was with a soft murmur, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at me, and for a moment, a flicker of panic crossed her face, the dawning realization of what had happened. I felt my own fear rise in response. But then she smiled, a slow, sleepy, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Hi," she whispered, her voice husky. "Hi," I whispered back. There was an awkwardness, but it was the tender, fragile awkwardness of something new and precious. We didn't have the words for what we were yet. We didn't need them. We untangled ourselves and moved to the kitchen, the air still cold. She found the matches and lit a candle, its small flame pushing back the gray gloom. We made coffee on the gas stove, our hands brushing as we reached for the kettle, for the mugs. Each small, domestic act was now layered with a new significance, a shared secret. We took our mugs back to the couch and huddled back under the quilt, shoulders and knees pressed together. We didn't talk about the future, about labels, about what this meant for our lives or her mother or Richard's poor, rejected son. We just sat in the quiet, sipping our coffee, watching the sun begin to rise, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange. I was so scared, she admitted after a while, her voice a low murmur against my hair. Me too, I said, leaning my head against hers. I'm still a little scared, she tightened her arm around me. It's okay, she said. We can be scared together, and in that moment, I knew that was all that mattered. The cold was gone. The storm was over. There, on that lumpy sofa, wrapped in a heavy quilt that smelled like cedar and home, I wasn't alone anymore. We had found a quiet harbor in the storm, a shared warmth that was more than just practical. It was everything.